What's good, my kings and queens? It is Micah Moore, and we're back again with another Sit and Pray. For the sisters that pray together, we're going to stay together. So I really wanted to recap about this story that I had watched, this movie I had watched on PureFlix, another great movie. Basically what happens is this is basketball coach whose basketball team is he no longer has a basketball team anymore. He's a high school basketball coach. A lot of the kids on the team, their parents worked at this factory, and the factory got shut down. So the parents were moving them out of state, moving them to better schools for just different reasons. So he was just really disheartened. He was just upset because he loved being a high school basketball coach. Basically what happened along the movie, the principal was like, hey, we want you to be the cross country coach. Nobody wanted to run cross country in the whole team. He was like, oh, that's some lame stuff. That's not even really a sport. And she was like, we need you do it. So he basically only has one girl on the team, and she has asthma. So he's like, I only have one person on the team that wants to do cross country, and she has asthma. That's crazy. So basically, he went to the church to do hospital rounds with his pastor, from some people at the church, and they said only one person could come in the room at the time, and visiting hours were almost over. So as he was waiting for the pastor to finish talking, he stumbles into a room with a blind man, and the blind man is like, hello, who's there? And he's talking to him, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to come in, I'm just waiting. And he was like, well, talk to me, I don't get a lot of visitors. So he's talking to him, and they get along because the blind man that's in the hospital bed, he's blind because of the diabetes, and they're trying to take his lungs. He said he was actually third in the state for running cross country. So the coach is like, oh, perfect. Well, put me on game. Tell me, what do I need to do? Because I don't know anything about running cross country. I don't know the first thing about running cross country. So they talk about it and they laugh. They have a good time. Visiting hours are over. So he's like, oh, I got to go. And he was like, okay, well, come back and see me. I don't get a lot of visitors. I don't have much family. He's like, yeah, I'll pray for you. Nonetheless, time goes by. The coach is still upset that he doesn't have a basketball team. So he ends up going back to the hospital to talk to the blind man in the bed. And he's like, I don't, just give me some advice. So the blind man and him are talking, put him on game. And the coach gets upset, and he's just like, oh, I'm just not a basketball coach anymore. And it's just really messing me up. And the blind man stops him, and he checks him. He's like, who are you? He's like, say you take away the title of a coach. Who are you? He's like, I'm a history teacher. Take that away. Who are you? He said, I am a husband and a father. God forbid, take that away. Who are you? After he gets down from a list of tangible titles and items, he's like, oh, well, I'm a Christian. And he's like, okay, well, is that important to you? And he was like, yeah, it's important. He was like, so why was that on the very last thing that you said was that you were a Christian and that you're a believer of Christ? And he really thought about it. And the part that got me was that this man obviously was speaking from the Lord, checking him from the Lord. The stakes were so high when he said that. He didn't have any family. He didn't have any visitors. He had been alone, and he was sad to be alone. And if he told this man about himself, the man could be like, man, you don't know me. I'm a good Christian. I don't need you. He could have left out and never came back. But the stakes were so high that basically he still followed God's plan and still listened to God's ruling at that time, telling him, speak this is what I need you to say. The man ended up leaving, the coach ended up leaving, but he came back, and he was like, you know what, I really thought about what she said, and that is so true. And I took that to heart, because I remember in high school, I had this drama class, and they were like, what are some things that you love? And I said, I love God. And they were like, that's crazy that you say you love God, because you don't ever talk about him. Now, I kept God and the church separate. And it's like, my grandfather was a pastor, you know what I'm saying? Like, of course I love God.
My word too.
But it's just like, your grandfather can be a pastor, you guys can be religious, but it's not about that. It's about the relationship that you have with Christ. And it was true. I wasn't talking about Christ enough for me to really declare and say that I loved him. I wasn't acting like, if you were to watch my behavior, you wouldn't believe like, oh, she's a follower of Christ. You just be like, oh, she's just a regular person.
Thank you.
So I really loved that he said that. But going back to the movie, after some time, he gets really close with the guy, and they're basically going through the steps of the whole movie. And the gist of it, he finds out that the one girl on his team that runs cross country is actually his daughter. And it was this whole story. He did drugs. The daughter ended up leaving. He ended up killing the mom because he had put her onto drugs. And then the daughter's grandma, didn't want her to have any dealings with her dad. So he was in a hospital bed about to die. And he found out, like, that's my daughter. And it goes back to say that the stakes were high for him in the hospital bed to tell him, hey, like, let me check you about this. If you say that you really love God, do you? He even asked him, he like, the other day you said that you would pray for me. Did you even pray for me? And the guy said no. And so we're thinking in just a moment that the stakes are so high for us. Oh, I won't have this person to talk to. But the stakes were, if he had never told him or never checked him about himself and his relationship with Christ, the man would have never came back. He would have took his coaching advice and was like, all right, cool, it was nice knowing you, peace out. But since he took it man to man and talked to him like a real person, and he did it in a loving way. He didn't check him in a bad way. He did it in a loving way for him to really assess himself and take accountability. He came back because people like when you live in truth. One thing about Jesus, he was honest, even when we didn't want to hear what he had to say. And a lot of times for me, I didn't always tell people things about themselves because I didn't want to sound mean, or I didn't want to hurt their feelings. One thing about my husband, in high school, I was a vegetarian. So if my breath stunk, he would tell me that my breath stunk. And it didn't make me feel bad. I knew vegetarian food stunk, but I would just, pop some gum in my mouth, pop a peppermint, and just keep it moving. And I took it because I knew that he was coming from a place of love. And same thing with Christ. Same thing for you. You have someone in your life that you love, and they're not taking accountability for the things that they need to. You will be held accountable if it's something that God is saying, you need to tell them about me. You need to tell them about the things they're wrong so that they can be corrected. You will be held accountable in the end as well, because you could have helped that person come to Christ. So going back to the story, the man, he thought his stakes were so high, like, oh, I won't have anybody to talk to, I'll die alone. But the stakes were even higher. If he had never talked to that man, he would have never met his daughter. His daughter was 15 years old. And to the end of the story, he got to meet her, have a great relationship with her, and he died 6 weeks later. He literally you don't know how much time you have. We think that we got all the time in the world. This man, yes, he had diabetes, but he was just saying that how fast it took him. He had diabetes for 5 years. So he could have lived 20 years with diabetes and would have been okay. But he met his daughter. He only had 6 weeks. And we don't know when our death date is. We pass it every single year, and we don't know when our last day is. And that's why we have to listen to God, and when he says act, we need to act. When he says act and we take our time, that is still sinning. We're still being disobedient because God is telling us to do something. We know what we should be doing, and we're doing the opposite. That's all I wanted to say. I really love that movie. Watch it. It's good. It's called The Overcomer on PureFlix. I'm not the type of person to be, excited about movies. When I was watching it, I was rooting for her, like, go Hannah, go, go, go. And, it's a movie, so it already has its ending, whether she wins or not. And a lot of times I don't want people to win. And spoiler, she won. And it's just it just made me feel so happy and full of faith and full of joy just on how they got there. And it was literally an overcoming story. But okay, that's it. Well, I love you. For the sisters that pray together, we're going to stay together. Bye.